A young man named Shin has a goal to become the strongest general on earth. His friend, Hyou, was killed before his eyes, and he couldn't do anything to save him. However, Shin vowed to seek revenge and continue his journey to fulfill his dream. Their shared dream was to become the greatest generals on earth. When Shin's friend was killed, he grabbed the flag and started training. But can Shin continue his journey alone and become like the 6 great generals? What happens when he meets the king and is invited to unite the great nation of China? The events are full of excitement and significance, and you'll need to follow them until the end to know everything. Shin and his friend Hyou are heading somewhere in the eastern part of the country. Suddenly, the earth trembles beneath them with great force. When they looked from the top of the hill, they saw a great war between the state of China and another country. It was their first time witnessing such a war, and their gazes were sharp because they wanted to become like those in the battle. The next day, they start training in stick combat. At that time, a passerby in a car noticed them and stopped because they caught his attention. The man, who goes by the name Shou Bunkun, tells them that he admires their bravery. He then speaks to himself, realizing that these young boys might be able to change the great nation of China. Remember this statement because we will understand its meaning later. Now we move to Hyou, the capital of the state of China, where the king's palace is located. The palace is filled with greed and ambition. The presidential palace is divided into 2 halves, the first half with the king Yi Sei and his advisor Ryu Fui, and the other half with the king's brother Sikyu and his advisor Ketsu Shi. Hyou and Shin end up in a brawl with the owner of a house, and after the fight, they enter their room. Shin is very angry because he doesn't want to stay in this place, but Hyou tells him that there is no other shelter and they won't be able to provide food or money. Suddenly, the son of the house's owner enters and informs them that there is an urgent matter. He tells Hyou that someone wants to see him, and that person is Shou Bunkun, the man who saw them yesterday. The house's owner explains that Shou Bunkun is one of the ministers working in the royal palace and holds a great position in the state of China. Shou Bunkun tells Hyou that he will be with them in the presidential palace, but Hyou asks about Shin, wanting him to be with him as well. The minister informs him that they only want him and it's not allowed to talk about the palace in this place. Hyou says he will think about it and Shou Bunkun leaves. At that moment, Shin overhears them and becomes very angry. He goes far away, and Hyou searches for him everywhere until he finds him at the training ground. Shin asks him why he didn't agree immediately and tells him it's a perfect opportunity and a once-in-a-lifetime chance. After much insistence from Shin, Hyou finally agrees, and they head to the palace. After days and months pass, we see Shin working alone on the land and farming. Then he goes to the market and overhears people talking about the royal palace. They were kicked out, and things are unstable there. Rumors spread that the king, the minister, and the servants have been killed. Shin becomes very concerned about this news. Now, we go to the royal palace where the advisor Ketsu Shi is talking to a soldier. The soldier informs him that Ryu Shou, one of the ministers, went to the kingdom of Wei, and it will be a very dangerous situation. They need to catch up with him. The advisor, Kichi, tells him that if he joins the kingdom will be divided, and they won't be able to claim the throne. At that moment, the young king, Siko, the younger brother of King Asi, speaks up and assures Shin not to worry. He has a very clever plan and wants them to kill his brother Asi as soon as possible and bring his head on a spear. We now switch to Shin, who remembers the rumors circulating in the market about the deaths of the king, the minister, and the servants. He recalls the events and memories of training with his friend, Hyou. He hopes that Hyou is safe and vows to check on him as soon as possible. However, something very eerie happens. Shin quickly gets up and opens the door, only to find Hyou lying on the ground, covered in blood. Shin becomes furious and calls for the homeowner to quickly bring a doctor. But his friend tells him that there's no need for a doctor because things are getting worse, and he is now in God's hands. Shin asks him what happened and who did this to him. Hyou replies that he was injured during the rebellion that occurred 3 days ago. The rebels were very powerful and aimed to overthrow the royal capital. Hyou then hands Shin a map that leads to the village of Kokohi. This village is where assassins and thieves from all over the kingdom gather, a village solely for criminals. Hyou came here to give Shin the map, urging him to go there quickly. Shin expresses his confusion about the situation, not understanding what Hyou is talking about. Hyou tells him to consider this his final testament and insists that Shin must go to that place. After delivering his final words, Hyou dies in Shin's arms. This is a tragic moment for Shin, as Hyou was his closest friend, akin to a brother and father figure. He swears to avenge his friend's death by eliminating all those who killed him. Shin is struck by the son of the homeowner, who tells him not to let Hyou's death go in vain and that he should go quickly to the location marked on the map and fulfill his friend's last request. Shin makes a swift decision and rushes off. He remembers the homeowner's warning to be extremely cautious about the people in that village. We now move to the royal palace, where the young king, Siko, is conversing with the advisor, Kichi. Siko informs him that they want to seize control of the kingdom as soon as possible. Above all, they want the head of his brother, the king, raised on a spear to confirm his death. Siko believes that his brother cannot be the king because their mother came from the common people, whereas his own mother was from a wealthy background. He also reveals that Chancellor Ryoshui has been his right-hand man in everything. Meanwhile, a man and his son are discussing what to do with Hyou's body. They decide to leave him as he is because someone is searching for him everywhere. Suddenly, a menacing man appears behind them and asks if the boy said anything before dying. The man replies that Hyou didn't say anything, and when they opened the door, they found him lying on the ground. At that moment, the menacing man grabs the child and threatens him with a weapon, demanding he reveal what happened. Now, back to Shin, who is running swiftly. He encounters a group of bandits who try to take his sword, but he easily dispatches them. The numbers increase, but he effortlessly eliminates them. Finally, Shin arrives at the location indicated on the map, a small cottage. But what awaits him inside this cottage? Shin enters and is shocked to see his deceased friend, Hyou. On the other hand, we shift our focus to the terrifying man with the giant sword, belonging to a clan called Shizhou. This clan is very famous for its numerous assassinations and bloodshed. They show no mercy or compassion, their hearts are like stones, even harsher. However, a strange and eccentric man emerges, wielding his sword and killing them without mercy. On the other hand, we now shift to Shin, who is in a hut, gazing at his friend, only to realize in the end that it is not his friend but someone who resembles him greatly. The person speaks to him, and Shin now knows that his dear friend, Hyou, has died. It is certain that you, Shin, bear a message from your deceased friend, Hyou. At this moment, Shin speaks with annoyance and anger, wondering how the stranger could know such information. He asks the Hyou look-alike who he is, and the person informs him that now is not the time for talking because the matter is bigger than he imagines. Suddenly, the eccentric and terrifying man appears. He speaks to the other person and tells him, "I will kill you, King Icy." Then the giant speaks to Shin, revealing that he was the one who accidentally killed his friend while intending to kill the king. They both resemble each other greatly. When Shin hears this, he remembers his dear friend and tears start flowing from his eyes. Shin finally understands the reason for Hyou's death and, filled with anger, he starts fighting the giant with all his physical strength and fighting skills. His movements are incredibly fast, but the giant strikes him with his foot, causing him to fall to the ground. On the other hand, we now shift to King Siko, the brother of King Icy. He wonders about his brother's fate because he wants to take control of the kingdom and doesn't want anyone to be his partner, not even his elder brother, who wants to kill him by any means necessary. At this moment, Kichi, the advisor, comes to him and informs him about a man named Shiko, who is a highly skilled fighter and is currently pursuing King Icy. He will definitely decapitate him because he comes from a clan experienced in combat. However, the advisor tells the king not to worry about this matter since he has sent some soldiers to pursue him. We now return to Shin, who is in pain from the relentless beatings. This giant, named Shiko, is incredibly powerful. Then Shin rises again and begins to fight Shiko, striking him with a powerful blow from his sword, but the other party blocks it. Then he remembers the young boy, Hyou, who used to talk to him about Shin, saying that he is much stronger and has a real ambition and goal. Returning to reality once again, Shin fights Shiko, and finally, he manages to strike a significant wound on his left side. Shiko is surprised by Shin's strength, as he has become faster than he imagined and much stronger. He now knows all of his attacks and anticipates them easily. Then Shiko attacks Shin again and inflicts a major injury on him. Shin, determined, rises to a higher level and delivers the decisive blow, breaking Shiko's sword, and he falls to the ground wounded. At this point, Shiko asks Shin to wait because he has children and wants to raise them. However, in the last moment, the king splits him in half. After a few minutes, the king feels the ground shaking beneath them, and a massive army is fighting this village, annihilating all the present. Shin is amazed by what he sees. The king informs him that his brother Shikoutei and his advisor Kichi have formed a large alliance with these armies. Then, Shin decides to fight this massive army, but the king tells him that he has lost his mind. They are a complete army, and we are no match for them. All we can do is kneel before them and beg for mercy. And suddenly, a child appears behind them and informs them that he knows a secret safe exit. However, the impulsive Shin believes that this child is responsible for their predicament and tries to kill him. The king advises Shin to calm down and asks the child if he wants some money to guide them to safety. The child agrees to the deal since he is familiar with the place and knows the entrances and exits. He introduces himself as Tin. As they enter the secret passage, Shin notices blood on the king and wonders about its origin. They realize that the army has committed a massacre in the village. Tin reveals that his parents died in a distant western country, which led him to come to this place. Shin remembers his friend Hyou's death and blames the king for it, vowing to kill him once they exit the passage. Meanwhile, the army searches for them everywhere but fails to find them. On the other hand, the king speaks to Tin, revealing that his grandfather died 3 days after his coronation, and his younger brother, King Shikoutei, succeeded him. However, King Shikoutei only ruled for 3 years before passing away, leaving the throne to the current king. The king explains that he was merely a figurehead and lacked the qualifications for military and state affairs. The real power resided with the advisors and ministers in the palace, who were driven by greed and ambition. However, there was one loyal person, advisor Ryafoi, who supported the king and strengthened his position. Another advisor, Kichi, did not like the king and supported his younger brother, King Shikoutei, who was responsible for the wars as he sought to seize power through a military coup. They had allied with the commander of the field army, Shou Bunkun, who was loyal to Shin. At this moment, Shin recalls the name Shou Bunkun, the one who took his friend Hyou. The king informs Shin that he was forced to do it, as it happened by chance while he was riding in a car. They brought this boy, who is an exact replica of the king, to be sacrificed instead of the king. Upon hearing this, Shin loses control of his anger and mercilessly strikes the king. Tin tells him to stop, and the king begins to remember and explains what happened. When the commander Shou Bunkun offered to be a substitute for the king, Hyou sacrificially agreed, knowing the danger and that he could die at any time. It was a great honor for him to be in the royal palace, even if only for a few moments, and his name would be immortalized in history as the king's look-alike who sacrificed his life to save the kingdom. Shin cries uncontrollably and falls to the ground, overwhelmed with grief and tears. The king tells him not to cry and presents him with 2 options, either return to the village as a slave or come with him to the palace and become someone of great importance. On the other hand, we shift our attention to the furious advisor, whose veins bulge on his face. Since they haven't reached the king yet, they want to kill him by any means necessary. At that moment, General Oki, one of the 6 great generals, enters and informs them that he will take matters into his own hands. On the other hand, we see the king and Shin finally exiting the secret passage. The king tells them that he will now go to the palace, but Shin informs him that it's impossible because the armies in the area are against the king, and he will be killed if he appears. Shin suggests that he should accompany the king, but that doesn't mean Shin is satisfied with the king. He tells him that he will only use him to fulfill his dream. Shin warns the king not to forget that one day he will bow down to him because he is just an ordinary human like Shin. The king tells him that it's not the time for talk and points to a distant place, indicating that they will go there and meet Chancellor Shou Bunkun. On the other hand, a person enters and informs Chancellor Shou Bunkun that the king has escaped, and they have searched for him everywhere but haven't found him. They also tell him that Shou Bunkun will be killed by General Oki. The chancellor asks about the fighter Shikoutei, who was following the king. The person tells him that someone named Mota, a young detective, was sent after him to find out what happened. Now let's shift our focus to this person called Mota. He has a very powerful sense of smell that allows him to track anyone. One of the soldiers mocks him, but Mota quickly reacts and shoots a poisonous arrow at him, killing him instantly. On the other hand, we move back to the king, who is running at his maximum speed in the forest. Shin gets exhausted and falls to the ground. The king carries him on his back and continues running. Night falls, and Ten speaks to the king about Shou Bunkun, asking if he's the only person the king trusts. The king answers that Shou Bunkun is his right-hand man and is extremely loyal to him. He would sacrifice his life and his family for the king. Morning comes, and Shin finally wakes up after a full day. Ten exclaims in surprise how a king can carry a servant on his back. Shin is confused because he doesn't remember anything that happened. Ten explains the situation to him and tells him what happened. Shin talks to the king and requests to carry him on his back as a way to repay the favor. However, the king refuses, saying that he doesn't want anyone to repay him. They continue their long journey until they finally reach a house where they will meet Shou Bunkun. They stay there and rest, and when they wake up, they find Ten has prepared a delicious meal for them. Shin asks the king about this place, and the king tells him that this place was where King Boku used to attend over 400 years ago. Then he began to narrate the full details of the story. King Boku loved all the inhabitants of the kingdom, and one day there was a tribe called the Mountain People. They saw one of the king's horses, so they captured it, killed it, and consumed its meat and blood. Shin was surprised by this and said that the king must have sought revenge against them in a severe manner. However, King Hyou told him that he didn't do that, but instead offered them a juice that tasted like the horse's blood. From that time, they were very happy with this king because he responded to harm with kindness. Then the Mountain King formed an alliance with King Boku, and King Boku provided them with a large place to settle in since they were nomadic and didn't have their own land. As for the place where they are currently sitting, it used to be a meeting place between the Qin kingdom and the Mountain People, but after King Boku's death, the Qin kingdom severed all ties with the Mountain People. Then night falls, and they go to sleep. In the morning of the next day, Ten goes out to gather some fruits and prepare breakfast for them when suddenly Mota appears behind him, almost killing him. However, Shin arrives and saves Ten at the last moment. At that moment, Mota realizes that this boy is the one who killed Shikoutei. He decides to kill him and takes out some poisonous arrows to shoot at him. But before he can do that, Shin draws his sword to kill him and cuts him in half. Then Mota quickly runs towards Shin with great speed, but Shin is able to defend against all his attacks. After several attempts by Shin, he finally manages to wound Mota in his hand. However, Mota gets very angry and attacks Shin again, knocking him down. Is it possible for Shin to kill Mota, or does Mota have another plan? Stay tuned for the next episode, but you have to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to receive updates.